Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Sofie Jacobs. Hi, Sofie. Thank you for joining me again.
Hi, Jules. Thank you for having me again. This is so exciting.
Yeah, it's great to have you back. Let's just recap a little bit and tell us a little bit about your company, Urban Hatch.
Urban Hatch was founded by myself, and I set it up to give expectant and new parents essentially the support and the guidance that they need to thrive, not just at home, not just in clinical care, but also at work. So we're looking at providing this holistic and comprehensive support during pregnancy, birth, postpartum, and return back into work.
What's the situation been like in Hong Kong for parents who are about to give birth?
It's been challenging. It's been really challenging, Jules. Pregnancy and, thinking about birth and postpartum already outside of a global pandemic comes with a number of anxieties and concerns and uncertainty. And the uncertainty is actually what often creates the anxiety. Throw into that COVID-19 with restrictions coming and going, women not knowing whether they're going to be giving birth by themselves or with their partners not knowing when they're going to be able to meet their baby for the first time. It's been challenging, not to mention not having family nearby. That in Hong Kong is huge, because of the amount of people that are here without their family nearby. It's challenging.
I can imagine. And if anybody is coming to Hong Kong, they've got to do a 3-week quarantine as well, which makes things very difficult for family if they're going to come for the birth of a baby.
Honestly, most of our clients have not seen their family for a long time. They know that they're not going to be seeing their families for a while longer. So it's interesting because what used to be very much a family-centered event, it used to be like an extended family event, and it's now become an event around just that core unit, the parents and the baby, and then maybe another 1 or 2 children. It's a very different experience today from what it was a year and a half ago.
It really is much more isolating, and it's really traditionally a time where families come together and support each other, and mothers and grandmothers support the mother and things like that. And it's much more difficult, isn't it?
It is. Now, the silver lining of this is, I would say, that the role of the partner during that immediate and early postpartum period has become more significant, and partners are actually able to thrive in that role a lot sooner compared to when family lands into the couple's flat and there's the mother-in-law hovering over whatever the partner is doing. There is definitely a silver lining, but it's one of the few, I would say. It's one of the few.
That is a nice silver lining and good for the dads, I think, because they can be a little bit marginalised in the early days if there are a lot of sort of women all around supporting. So that's quite nice. Tell me a bit about what have the restrictions been in Hong Kong recently during COVID and how have they changed?
Recently, before Christmas, they brought in essentially in the public hospitals in Hong Kong a blanket ban on birth partners, where birth partners were essentially not allowed anymore to accompany women during labor, during birthing, and visit them in that immediate postpartum period. That was huge. That created a lot of anxiety amongst expectant mums. That ban, quite honestly, was already in place earlier in the year, but it just wasn't really officially announced. And what they said was that, look, we will look at this case by case. When you go into labor and we've got X amount of cases, we're not going to be allowing your partner in. That already caused a huge amount of anxiety. Then the blanket ban came in and people suddenly felt like, okay, if I'm going to be giving birth in the next few weeks, I am on my own. And that whole planned or imagined birth experience that they had in mind, a big chunk of that was immediately thrown out of the window and it was completely outside of their control. So that was big. And you know what? I understand that hospitals need to keep hospitals safe. I understand that there need to be rules, restrictions, but there are ways to go about it. And I think putting a blanket ban in place in a country that's actually doing really, really well in terms of number of cases, I just didn't agree with how that was handled. So we actually responded to that by putting a campaign in place as Urban Hedge. We wrote a letter to the Department of Health and the Health Authority explaining why we felt that blanket ban should be reviewed. We also suggested for them to put a rapid COVID test into place because, as I said, we do understand the need for hospitals trying their best to keep the hospitals and the staff as safe as possible. We then also launched a petition via change.org, and that gained a fair amount of momentum just in a number of weeks. Alongside that, Lindsay Ford, who is a second-time mum now, she just recently gave birth to her second baby. She launched the Hong Kong Advocacy Birth Partner WhatsApp group. That group just became quite big fairly quickly, and Lindsay did a fantastic job talking to the press. We spoke to the press as well, and then that together, these recent combined efforts with the efforts that another person did earlier on in the year. She launched a petition that I think at the moment has 5,000 signatures. I think all those combined efforts have made the Department of Health and the Health Authority go, okay, we need to review this. In the beginning of January, that blanket ban was stopped. They're now allowing birth partners to be present as long as they have a negative COVID test result that was done within 72 hours of the admission. And then obviously the laboring woman needs a negative test as well, but that's usually done on admission. Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic news. It's still not an ideal situation because, as we all know, labor and birth are unpredictable and we can't always plan when it starts. The fact that they're not allowing rapid COVID tests yet means that the accompanying partner every few days needs to go and get tested. But I think for now, it's a small price to pay.
It's definitely better than not being able to go at all. But I can imagine babies can come at any time. The partner's got to be testing, I guess, 3 or 4 weeks before the due date, just in case. Yeah. And if they then come after the due date, they could be testing every 3 days for 6 weeks, couldn't they? Which could be very tedious.
It's tedious. It's annoying. It's not ideal. It's not ideal for sure. Hopefully, in the near future, the public hospitals will allow rapid COVID tests, even if people have to pay for them themselves, but just allow the results But I think we're not quite there yet. But this is a step in the right direction.
Well, fingers crossed for that will happen, because we're certainly progressing, aren't we, in that direction? So hopefully that'll come in the near future.
I mean, the crazy thing is, and this gets me always a little bit angry and upset when I think about it, private hospitals, so this blanket ban rule and the current rule that's there for birth partners that is related to the public hospitals. If you are willing to pay and give birth privately, you're in a different situation.
Disadvantages those people that can't afford the quite expensive private hospitals in Hong Kong.
It's beyond can't afford, because I think a lot of people in December, when this blanket ban came through, we had a lot of phone calls from couples who were very close to giving birth. We are actually thinking about switching to private healthcare now. We don't have private medical insurance that covers maternity, but we're thinking about paying for it ourselves. Do you think it's a good idea? We worked with a number of couples on this, because their question is, how much money can you put onto the experience of having your partner with you during birth? And that is a really difficult question, because the tricky thing is that before, when this blanket ban came in place, a number of the private hospitals reacted to that in a very clever way, thinking about business, and put together COVID packages. So people who didn't have private medical insurance and were planning on giving birth publicly could then switch to private healthcare at a capped price. But the capped price for a normal vaginal delivery with epidural analgesia was still at around about just under 70,000 Hong Kong dollars. An emergency cesarean section, 88,000 Hong Kong dollars. And that's not including meals, not including screening tests, and so on and so on. Imagine, Jules, when you're pregnant, you're close to giving birth, you planned all along to give birth in a public hospital that would cost around about 500 Hong Kong dollars. You could pay with your octopus card. You then decide, I want my partner there, guaranteed, as long as they're COVID negative, and I'm willing to pay for this myself. I don't have a lot of spare cash, but you know what? If I really work towards a spontaneous vaginal delivery, maybe with epidural analgesics, it's going to set us back just under 70K. Then this little voice pops up. But what if I end up with an emergency cesarean section? What if baby needs to go to the special care unit? Are we going to end up being in a situation where we end up broke or massively in debt? Whenever a woman starts to have those future tripping anxieties and worries about stuff that's actually outside of her control, it's not going to do the start of the labor and the progress of the labor any favors. So we did a lot of work with quite a few couples on this, and let's put things into perspective and let's just explore the pros and the cons of each option and then work together on coming to an agreement. You're in charge of the agreement, but we've just kind of coached you through it. That's been a huge part of our work.
That is a big issue that I hadn't even thought of, that predicting what might go wrong, how much more that'll cost, and then giving you kind of a negative mindset before you even begin the labor.
And the pressure.
Stressful. Yeah,
the pressure of, gosh, I've got to give birth vaginally, naturally, ideally without epidural, because that's going to be within our budget. It doesn't help that flow of that beautiful oxytocin and those endorphins, and it's going to spike the adrenaline for sure. That's a layer that came into this quite significantly.
And is this something that you address in your antenatal classes with parents? Talking about all the restrictions?
Yes, we do. We actually launched a number of giving birth during COVID-19 campaigns, not just for Hong Kong, but also the UK and the US. And they have been very helpful, and they were all very well received, because what we did in those sessions was basically instill confidence in a woman's ability and capability to give birth. We instilled confidence in partners, in their role as a supporting partner, even if they're not physically able to be present. Talked about bonding with baby. How do you manage that? Because even currently at the moment in public hospitals, new partner parents are not allowed until mum and baby get discharged, essentially. There are a few ways around it, and depending on who is in charge on that day, they may allow you to kind of go down to the lobby and meet and show baby off. But ultimately, that bonding with baby process needs to be rethought and re-explored.
That needs to be more of a priority, doesn't it, for the lawmakers and the people that are creating these laws? They should be putting it in the forefront of their thinking.
I am actually very optimistic and hopeful because we do live in a country that's got a fairly rigid system, bit of an understatement. So I think that them having reviewed the complete ban is a step in the right direction.
The difference between going in alone or going in with a birth partner would be absolutely huge on not only your psyche, but the whole birth process.
Now, the feedback that we've had from clients we work with who ended up giving birth on their own was that the actual pre-thoughts that came with that and thinking about the experience that they wouldn't get and the experience that they would get because of this ban, the majority of them actually ended up having a positive experience. Because when you think about labor and birth, I always tell our clients that the unit of the woman who is going to give birth and her birth partner, whether that is her life partner or her doula or a combination of both, they're the A team. The midwives at the hospital, they're part of that B team of support. And what's happened during that complete ban is that the A team was the woman and the midwife at the hospital and the partner, but remotely. Luckily in Hong Kong is a very safe place to give birth. A number of the public hospitals have now also started to understand what a birth wish list means. They're communicating with women in labor, they're explaining things, and they're giving the support. I mean, it doesn't happen everywhere yet to the standards that we are used to and we would like to see everywhere, but it's definitely, again, going in the right direction.
How do you think not having the birth partners present at the birth impacts families and the bonding with the babies afterwards?
Oh, Jules, that is a really good question. And it's not an easy one to answer, but I'll try my best. So we've spoken with a lot of the families that we work with who experienced giving birth without a birth partner present. We've also spoken with a number of new parents who were the partner and weren't there during the birth, but then came into that family unit when mum was discharged with the baby or the babies. The thought process they went through before the actual birth process was more traumatic than when it actually was happening. I think we also need to remember that for most birth partners, especially if they're male, that bonding process with baby doesn't really fully get started until a little bit later in that immediate postpartum. What we actually encourage everyone to do, and we still do that now because it's always nice, is for dads or partners to wear the same t-shirt for a number of nights in a row. So that t-shirt, that cloth nicely absorbs their scent. We encourage women in labor to wear that t-shirt because it actually taps into their limbic system and into that primal nervous system. And it actually helps the oxytocin to flow, etc., etc. In a time of COVID where in public hospitals, partners are still not allowed to come and visit during that immediate postpartum on the postnatal ward, why not have baby wrapped in that t-shirt or at least have the t-shirt near the baby?
What a great idea. That is fantastic.
It's very primal. And then obviously, because family is not nearby in many family units, then that bonding process, as we said at the beginning of this chat, will expedite because there's no one hovering over the birth partner. They're not going, oh, no, don't do it this way. This is not how we
let me hold the baby.
Let me hold the baby. So birth partners, especially dads, are now just being pulled into that bonding process as soon as mother and baby come home, and they kind of get thrown into it from the deep end. That's a massive silver lining because their confidence goes up. Their belief in their ability to be a parent goes up massively.
Am I right in saying that now dads or birth partners are allowed in the labour ward, but then they can't visit after the baby's born until the mum leaves. Can they hold their baby after it's born and then that's it?
And that's it.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that's
and
it.
then a woman's usually in for about 3 days. Is that right, after birth?
Yeah, 2 to 3 days. If you want to, you can. And we encourage now our clients to get a discharge as long as it's medically safe to do so as early and as quickly as possible, because they can get postnatal support from private midwives at home.
Which is ideal, isn't it? Because then both parents can be there. Yeah.
Exactly.
So that's actually a good idea. Can nobody visit at the moment? The visiting hours are like nothing.
Yeah,
because of COVID. Right. Okay. So that's an issue as well, isn't it? So not only are there not allowed to be any visiting, but then the mums are alone as possible. Their milk comes in, the emotional fourth day, maybe postpartum depression, anything like that. There's no family support.
Yeah, Jules, it is definitely a challenge. Women not having any visitors in that immediate postpartum period whilst they're still at the hospital, because that's often a time when women literally present their baby, present the kind of the fruits of the relationship that they have with their partner to friends, to family. They get put in the spotlight. All their hard work is being recognized. They get the support when their milk comes in, when they're hitting that baby blues. And that's now very, very different. I mean, even after discharge home from the hospital, at the moment, most people are not having that many visitors. That challenge carries on even beyond getting home from the hospital. I feel that there's a lot of grieving going on amongst women, partners as well, because everyone builds up a bit of a picture of what that experience is going to be like. Pregnancy is already different because people are not able to meet up with other expectant, couples. In-person antenatal classes have been scrapped a long time ago and they're not going to come back for a very long time, if ever. That's all very challenging. And I think the postnatal depression is definitely on the rise. Post-traumatic stress disorder, post-birth is on the rise as well. But what's not being talked about is that grieving post-birth is on the rise. And that is definitely something that we see. It's grieving an experience that they didn't get.
Even if you have a healthy baby, you're still grieving the opportunity that you lost because of COVID. And that's not only in the hospital during the birth, but it's straight after the birth. And then it's when you're at home. In fact, now that we're talking, it's really made me realize what a huge impact COVID's having on the entire birth process, from the time you discover you're pregnant until the baby starts growing. It's really very huge, isn't it?
It's huge. It's huge. And it starts with, like you said, the antenatal appointments. A lot of antenatal clinics now don't allow birth partners to be present during the appointments, including the scans. And scans really in the first place, and this is coming from a medical professional, should be used as a measure to look at the fetal well-being and at the health of the placenta, etc., etc. But we can't ignore the fact that it's also become very much of an experience for the expectant mum and her partner to be able to actually see their baby and to see their baby move and maybe suck its thumb and get a few photos. That grieving process is already related to that. The experience of being pregnant being very different from what was imagined.
Yeah, because it's a real time of bonding and closeness for mum and dad, or mum and dad, or whoever's looking at the baby. Let's be inclusive here. But it is a real opportunity for parents to connect, isn't it, over the joy of their baby. So to go and do that on your own, it would be sad, and you've got no one to share that excitement with.
Now, the silver lining of that, again, is definitely become more of a cocooning experience of couples together. And maybe partners are not allowed in some hospitals to be present during the scanning appointments, but then they may spend some more time actually connecting, physically connecting. So maybe that intimacy is more there compared to a world outside of COVID. Most things do have a silver lining. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of deep digging. Sometimes time needs to go by for us to go.
Reflect.
Yes. Yeah.
What sort of fears do you find that expectant mothers and their partners have surrounding COVID, apart from the obvious that maybe they won't be together in the birth? But do they recognise these other fears of seeing people or what's going to happen afterwards or not having family?
Yeah, it's really interesting, actually. The actual health fears in terms of their own health. I think most people are actually not that worried about getting COVID as a pregnant woman or passing it on to baby. We don't get many questions around breastfeeding. Can I breastfeed? Is it safe to breastfeed? Everyone now knows what good hygiene means and what that looks like. And we all have our own little quirks around that as well. So what we tell our clients, what we advise them to do is to have a good think about what are your rules, what are your boundaries. Already start thinking about these during pregnancy and then put them in place. Tell your friends, tell your family. Some people are comfortable to have people in their house after baby is born and others aren't. Every individual has their own fears and their own anxieties. When we're working with couples, it's always important for them to communicate their fears and their anxieties with each other so that they're both clear, and they need to look at each other with empathy and compassion, because as you and I know, fear isn't always rational. Quite often it's not rational at all. Communication is key.
And also, I think that there's probably some other things that you would tell parents to help them be less anxious, like self-care strategies, apart from just communicating. Like, what other things do you do to help alleviate the anxiety?
So the first thing that we do is tell people that we're not going to be able to completely alleviate the anxieties because of the nature of the process of pregnancy and birth and postpartum. There is always going to be anxiety and concern there. So let's lean into that. Let's allow ourselves to feel anxious, but then get the support to put the anxiety in a framework. I really like this strategy is that when anxiety is there, we frame it by putting a time frame around it. And we teach our clients when those anxieties come up for them to go, okay, I am feeling anxious right now. Because then immediately the anxiety becomes more manageable. You know, if you feel anxious and you don't frame it to the moment you're in, it's huge, it's massive, and it becomes something that you cannot manage. But if you frame it with right now, it actually becomes a lot more manageable. By accepting it as well, accepting the fact that you are going to feel anxious, that in itself actually relieves some of that anxiety. Because anxiety tends to become bigger and bigger and bigger when we put pressure on ourselves to not be anxious.
I think also, like you said, talking about it and putting it out there makes it more manageable as well. You're much more anxious while you're not expressing what's going on. And then I guess even things like breathing or meditation or
exactly
prenatal yoga or anything like that could help as well.
What we do at Urban Hedge is we have a beautiful digital support program that is designed to support and guide expectant parents during pregnancy. It helps prepare them for birth and it helps guide and support them during postpartum. It is 100% digital and it's a combination of content that sits on our platform that people can tap into, that kind of educational part. And then the support part is delivered via video sessions. In one of our support sessions, packages offer weekly Q&A sessions with one of our midwives and weekly guided relaxation sessions. And we brought in the guided relaxation sessions just before COVID hit. And then obviously during COVID, they have just moved up on the "this is really important" section. So on a weekly basis, our Hedge members can come and join the relaxation sessions. On a weekly basis, they can hop online and ask us the questions and share their concerns and worries and anxieties. And we're there with them every step of the way, as much as they require.
That's brilliant, just to see how much you've adapted and shifted your practice with COVID and how you're really meeting the needs of the parents, even though they can't come and have antenatal classes in person.
The ironic thing is, Jules, is that I launched this digital program at the beginning of 2018. Back then, people were like, well, why would I want to do this online? And now this is the best option and the safest option.
Sophie, how do you think that the work from home restrictions impact family life once the baby comes home?
Oh, I love this question. In theory, we'd hope that this is like the perfect scenario, right? Like partner is working from home, mother comes home with the baby, they're all together, that caregiving can be shared. In reality, it is challenging because how do you set your boundaries? What do your boundaries look like? So I think we do a lot of work with a number of corporate firms on gender diversity and inclusion, and we help them create programs that are designed to develop, nurture, and retain parents. And support is needed for that. And it's definitely something that has come up in our work in the last year with corporate firms. It's the boundaries, that work-life balance you would think would be a lot better when people are working from home. But in reality, it's only going to be better if there are clear boundaries that are put in place. I think a lot of people are still in that learning phase at the moment.
Yeah, I think it would be a lot about who's responsible for what and how can you support each other with baby and with the person who's working, and about managing space, which is at a premium in Hong Kong as well.
Yeah.
So that can make it difficult as well. Get off that call, the baby's trying to sleep, we don't have the space, very difficult.
Definitely. And it's about sharing responsibility and how do you go about it. So we launched a few sessions last year actually and continue to roll these out. And it's about how to rock early parenthood as a couple during this time. And it's about, working together in a sustainable way, because that's important. We don't want two people doing a one man's job. We don't need two parents to get up in the night to feed the baby. Let's just work on how you can do that in a sustainable way.
Do you hear much about how COVID has impacted job loss or income, and that becomes a concern for new parents as well?
We work with a few people who recently lost their jobs. We work with a number of teachers. One couple I'm thinking of in particular, both parents lost their job on the same day. My heart really goes out to them. They're not from Hong Kong. They're here as expats and they're going to be in employment until the start of the next term. That's heartbreaking. We now know that the stresses around finances are huge. People are losing their jobs left, right, and center. And then there is the added challenge of not having the family support. For most couples that we work with, the family support is not right here. It's not here physically.
Yeah, it's very sad, isn't it? I just really feel for people in that situation. I can't even imagine.
You can't imagine. No, you can't imagine. I mean, it's extremely, extremely hard because when you think about basic human needs, we need to be fed, we need to be loved, we need to be sheltered. When you're a parent and you just have a new baby and you lose your job, how is that going to impact your confidence in your ability to be a good parent? The good news is that there is support available, and anyone who is in that type of situation, this is not a time to try to be a hero. Get support.
Ask for help. Ask for help.
Yeah.
So where could people ask for help if they were in that situation?
We're here to provide support to parents. When it comes to financial health support, there are services in Hong Kong that can help with that, but most services are private. You need cash to be able to afford that.
I guess a lot of people are leaving Hong Kong and heading home as well if they're in that situation, going back to family if they can.
Yes, because I think especially for expats without a job,
why would you stay?
Why would you stay? Why would you stay?
Do you think that the isolation that we talked about earlier and postpartum depression makes it harder for families or professionals to recognise postpartum depression? Is it getting diagnosed as much as it normally would pre-COVID?
Postnatal depression is actually something that I know and I believe is still getting missed even outside of COVID. And it's likely to be missed even more now because there are no visitors, not many visitors that come and see mom and dad. There is more isolation And perhaps the symptoms of postnatal depression at the moment don't get picked up by people in the inner circle as much either. We're not able to do our events at the moment. We have 2 events that are designed to bring people together, and that's our Mama Needs a Mocktail event that we do on a regular basis. Yeah,
I love
it's good,
that.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So we get expectant and new mums together over a mocktail. That's a really good way for them to meet each other in person and to get some mama bonding going on. And we have an event for dads as well, expectant and new dads. It's called Urban Dads. At the moment, we're not able to do any of these, and that's a bit of a bummer. However, we try to do as much as we can virtually, and that works well to a certain extent. We've also launched our Urban Hedge WhatsApp due date groups that people can join on a voluntary basis. It's completely free of charge, and it gets managed by our midwives. We check in with them and ask how everyone is doing. Is it ideal? And are we going to be able to pick up all the postnatal depression symptoms? No, definitely not. But it's a support tool that is there.
Yeah, and people are getting more used to virtual Zooming and everything like that. It's becoming more of our everyday lifestyle. So hopefully people would buy into that and use that really well as a resource.
Yeah, and I think our Hedge support packages and programs, they're quite good because we're a small company, we're a small team of midwives. We know all our members and we get to know them from already in the pregnancy. And so people who are in that group, definitely we keep very close eye on them.
Sofie, what advice would you have for expectant mothers and their partners during the pandemic?
Never plan your birth in detail. And that's even something that we say outside of the pandemic. Move away from the birth plan. Forget about the small details and think about the bigger picture. What we want to work towards is a positive birth experience. And that's an experience where the outcome essentially is a healthy mum, a healthy baby or healthy babies, and a process where they feel supported, including the partner as well. That support may look different from what you had hoped, but there is still going to be support there. Like, I think that everyone now needs to instill a bit more confidence in their own ability to give birth, in their own ability to be a supporting partner, even if it's remotely. Instead, work with a birth wish list. Think a little bit about, okay, this is what I would like, but I'm going to have a growth mindset and not a fixed mindset. Because as soon as you go into your birth and you kind of try to minimize your future tripping, your body is going to relax and your mind is going to relax, and that oxytocin can flow, your endorphins can flow, and that adrenaline goes right down.
And that's what you want.
And that's what you want, exactly.
Sofie, thank you so much for coming back to my podcast again. And how can my listeners find you if they'd like to get in touch with you at Urban Hatch?
The best way to get in touch is to pop to the website, which is www.urban-hatch, as in an egg is hatching, not a hedge of foliage. I know that my T sounds like a D. .com. So it's www.urban-hatch.com.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in the show notes so people can find it easily if they want to reach out to you. Sofie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and this is such an important topic. And I really appreciate you giving up your time to come and talk to us so we can hopefully help new expectant mothers and new mothers out there to manage their lives during COVID. It's not easy.
It's not easy, but it can be done. And I think now, 12 months in, a lot of women have given birth. A lot of women are pregnant all over the world, and you can do it. Women can do it. Partners
Girl power. We are resilient beings.
I mean, women are made to give birth.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and it's just a shift in
expectations.
Shift in expectations.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Sofie, thank you so much. So for my listeners out there, if this is something you've really enjoyed, or you know somebody who's just had a baby or about to have a baby, please can you share this podcast with them? If you could go to iTunes to rate and review Hong Kong Confidential, that will help me go up the iTunes charts, and it will also help people find Sofie and Urban Hatch. So thanks again, Sofie. It's been absolutely amazing, and I always love talking to you.
Same here, Jules. Thank you for having me, and thanks everyone for listening, and hopefully see you soon in person.
Yeah, I can't wait to get back to podcasting in person. Thank goodness for Zoom. See you, Sophie.
See you. Bye.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.